The small town had seen better days. But for Clara May, even its worst was all she had. After the fire took the orphanage where she once taught, and the county shut it down, she roamed with just a duffel bag and a tattered resume. No family, no husband, no home. That morning, she stood outside the school gates, watching kids run into classrooms she used to teach in. Her name was wiped from the staff list like dust on a chalkboard. When she tried to speak with the principal, they wouldn't even let her pass the front door. Her old co-workers avoided her gaze, whispering as she walked past. She smiled politely, gripping her bag tighter. By sunset, Clara had walked to the edge of town, hoping the boarding house still took people in. What she didn't know was that night wouldn't end with a bed, but with gravel under her head. The woman at the boarding house peered over her glasses with a cold smirk. No space. Try the shelter. Clara nodded, thanking her softly before stepping back out. The shelter wasn't any better. Closed due to funding cuts. That night, the teacher who once recited poetry by lamplight curled up behind a hardware store, her coat barely thick enough to fight the frost creeping through the wind. She tried to sleep, using her bag as a pillow, but the stones beneath made it feel like punishment. Her thoughts wandered to her students, to lessons interrupted by fire alarms and goodbyes said too early. She had given her whole life to children who no longer remembered her name. Now, no one even remembered she was still in town. Her stomach ached with hunger, but pride wouldn't let her beg. She whispered a prayer, not for food, but for someone to remember she was human. Morning came with harsh light and loud footsteps. Clara woke to a broom nudging her ribs. "You can't sleep here." The store clerk didn't wait for a reply. She dusted off her skirt, stood, and walked away in silence. By noon, she was back on the road, not sure where her feet were taking her. She passed the town diner, the same one where she used to grade papers over coffee. Now, the smell of eggs and bacon mocked her empty stomach. She sat on the curb, pretending to tie her shoe just to rest without looking like a vagrant. Then, a shadow stretched. Beside her, boots, muddy, worn. Next to the boots was a cane carved from old hickory. She looked up and met eyes with a weathered man wearing a dusty hat. He said nothing, just nodded once. It was the beginning of a moment neither of them could explain. The rancher didn't ask questions. He simply tipped his hat, turned, and walked. Clara hesitated, but something about the man's quiet presence pulled her to her feet. She followed, keeping a few paces behind as they moved through side streets and into the open plains beyond the edge of town. He didn't look back once. The road turned from pavement to gravel, then to dry earth scattered with horse tracks. After nearly an hour, they reached a wide wooden fence and a rusted sign that read Sutter Ranch. The barn stood like a silent guardian behind, a two-story house that had seen storms and sun in equal measure. He opened the gate and gestured to the porch. Clara stepped inside carefully, her shoes crunching on fallen leaves. The ranch smelled of pine, leather, and something else, like memories. He handed her a tin mug of water. Still, not a word was spoken. Inside the house, everything looked worn but cared for. The rug near the fireplace had patches sewn in by hand. A photo of a younger man and a woman in a wedding dress sat crooked on the mantel. The rancher pointed to a narrow room near the back, small but warm. A bed with wool blankets, a lamp, and a little window overlooking the corral. Clara stepped in slowly, unsure if she was dreaming. She hadn't touched a mattress in weeks. Her fingers ran across the quilt like it was gold. She sat, then crumbled into it, burying her face in the softness. She didn't ask why he helped. She didn't dare. Not yet. Her body gave in to exhaustion before gratitude could rise. That night, she slept like she hadn't in months. Outside, the rancher sat on the porch under the stars, one hand resting on the hickory cane, watching the wind. The next morning, Clara woke to the smell of coffee and the faint clink of tools. She stepped outside, the sun already warm against her skin. In the yard, the rancher was mending a fence, moving slowly but with purpose. She approached, offered to help. He handed her gloves without a word. They worked in quiet rhythm, side by side. He fixed the rails. She held them steady. Midday passed, and neither asked questions. It was a peace she hadn't felt since childhood, just the land, the sky, and the work. When they broke for lunch, he handed her a sandwich, wrapped in paper. Simple, honest. She didn't cry until he walked away. Not because of pity, but because someone had seen her struggle and simply offered space to breathe. She realized then, this wasn't charity. It was dignity, something she hadn't been given in a very long time. Days passed in quiet rhythm. Clara woke before dawn, swept the porch, fed the chickens, and helped the rancher tend to the horses. She learned his name from the stitched initials on an old saddle, J.T. Sutter. Still, he spoke little, but he noticed everything. When her boots had holes, a pair of sturdy ones appeared on the porch. When she coughed in the cold, a scarf lay folded by the fireplace. Clara began to feel like the house was healing her. Bit by bit, like it was wrapping its weathered walls around her sorrow and squeezing it out gently. Each task gave her purpose again. She didn't just sleep in that room. She found rest. Her soul, once frayed, was slowly being sewn together with thread made of kindness. She stopped asking where she would go next. For the first time, she started wondering if she was already there. One evening, while brushing a mare, Clara noticed a classroom photo pinned to the barn wall. She stepped closer. It was her old class. Her face was circled in pencil. Shock hit her like a gust of prairie wind. She turned to look at JT, who was standing silently by the barn door. He gave the faintest nod before walking off, leaving her with more questions than answers. How did he know? Why did he keep that photo? That night, Clara stood by the fireplace holding the photo in trembling hands. Her past hadn't been erased. It had followed her here, hidden in the most unexpected place. She suddenly realized this wasn't coincidence. The world hadn't forgotten her. Someone had remembered, and that changed everything. The house no longer felt like shelter. It felt like fate. And she started to believe that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't been abandoned by life after all. The next morning brought a knock at the ranch gate. A school superintendent had come looking for help. One of the nearby towns had lost its only teacher to illness, and the school year was hanging by a thread. Word had spread about a teacher living on Sutter Ranch. Clara stood frozen, unsure if she had the strength to step back into a classroom. But JT looked at her and did something unexpected. He smiled. Just a crack in the corner of his face, but it said everything. It said she could. She took the job, hesitant but hopeful. Her first day back in front of a chalkboard was filled with nerves, but the children's laughter slowly melted the fear. The blackboard wasn't just slate, it was a door opening again, and Clara stepped through it, this time not as a forgotten woman, but as someone rebuilt by mercy and second chances. The small schoolhouse buzzed with life as Clara erased the board after her first full week. Her hands remembered the motion, like riding a bicycle after years away. Parents began stopping by to thank her, some recognizing her from her past school, others simply grateful for her gentle ways. Her lessons weren't just about reading or numbers, they were about resilience, kindness, and wonder. She didn't tell the children about the gravel pillow or the hunger pains, but in every story she read aloud, there was a thread of survival stitched between the words. One day, a girl drew her a picture of a house, with a heart above the roof, and handed it to her quietly. Clara smiled, folded the drawing, and slipped it into her coat pocket. That night, she placed it beside her bed at the ranch, letting it rest beside her in a way no words ever could. As the weeks rolled into months, Clara brought life back to both the classroom and the ranch. She planted flowers along the porch, fixed a broken hinge on the barn gate, even painted the mailbox red. JT watched from a distance, sometimes handing her tools, other times just standing by with his cane in hand. One late afternoon, he called her name. It was the first time she heard it from his lips. He handed her a small metal key. "For the upstairs," he said simply. Clara stared at it, unsure what he meant. That night, she climbed the stairs she'd never dared to explore. At the top was a room filled with dust and memory. A room that once belonged to someone else. A woman's shawl still hung on the door, and on the dresser sat a photo of a bride. JT's wife. Clara knew then. She had stepped into a story already half written. Clara didn't move into the upstairs room. She dusted it, aired it, and sat there often, but never claimed it as her own. It felt sacred, like walking through someone else's prayer. But from that night on, something between her and JT shifted. He no longer kept distance. He shared coffee. He asked about her students. Slowly, two people scarred by loss began to share silence without sorrow. One Sunday morning, JT found her reading under the willow tree and placed a worn book on her lap. Inside was an inscription, "For whoever carries this house forward." The book was a deed. The house, The land. Everything. Clara looked up, stunned. JT simply said, "I'm going to the Veterans Lodge. I won't need it anymore." She tried to argue, but he raised his hand gently. It was waiting for the right soul. "And it chose you." Then he walked away, boots soft against the earth. Clara stood on the porch long after JT left, clutching the deed like it might vanish in the wind. She had never owned anything more than her clothes and lesson. Plants, now she had acres. A roof, and a legacy not built by her hands, but entrusted to them. That night, she didn't sleep in the spare room. She stayed by the fireplace, rereading every word of the document by candlelight. Her heart was a mix of gratitude and fear. What if she couldn't keep it up? What if she failed this place the way life had once failed her? But somewhere between doubt and dawn, she remembered the children's laughter, the steady rhythm of the land, and JT's quiet nods. He hadn't given her the ranch out of pity. He had seen strength in her that she'd forgotten existed. And now, the land itself seemed to whisper, "You belong here." The next few weeks were filled with paperwork, repairs, and unexpected guests. Neighbors who had long forgotten Sutter Ranch stopped by to offer tools, paint, and stories about JT. Clara listened with care, learning that he'd once taught veterans to read in his barn and had kept a little notebook with names of every child he'd helped over the years, including many of her former students. The ranch had always been a quiet refuge for those who fell through the cracks. Now it had chosen a caretaker who knew that feeling intimately. Clara hosted a community meal under the old willow. Tables were lined with food, and children played tag between the fence posts. No one spoke about the woman who once slept behind a hardware store. They only saw the teacher who had brought life back to the fields. And for the first time, Clara didn't feel like a visitor. Late one evening, Clara found herself walking through the upstairs room again, dust-free now and touched by soft sunlight. She sat on the edge of the bed where JT's wife must have once rested. On the nightstand was a small, carved wooden box. Inside was a letter addressed not to her name, but to the one who stayed. It was written in careful cursive, signed by the rancher's late wife. It spoke of loss, resilience, and a hope that the house would one day belong to someone with the heart of a teacher. Clara closed the letter slowly, her throat tight. This gift had been years in the making. It wasn't just land. It was faith, a belief that the world still had space for quiet goodness. That night, Clara sat on the porch with the stars above and the key in her pocket. The mansion wasn't made of gold, but it was hers. Winter came early that year, draping the ranch in soft white silence. Clara learned how to light the old furnace, fix broken pipes, and thaw frozen troughs with buckets of warm water. She did it all without complaint. The house seemed to teach her something new. Each day, how to stay rooted even when the cold tried to push you inward. She kept the classroom warm with extra blankets and stories that wrapped the children in laughter. Parents began offering small gifts, fresh eggs, wool scarves, home-cooked meals. One mother whispered, "You gave our town its heart back." Clara didn't know how to respond, so she just smiled. The once orphaned teacher, once homeless and forgotten, had become something else entirely, someone people looked to for calm, for comfort, for direction. Without realizing it, she had grown into the very kind of shelter she once begged the world to give her. One night, while sorting through a box of old records in the attic, Clara found a sealed envelope addressed to the local school board. It was JT's handwriting. Inside, a letter and a check. A donation large enough to fund books, meals, and supplies for the next 5 years. It was dated 3 months before he left. He hadn't just given her a home. He had planned for everything else too. She walked to the window and looked out over the snow-covered fields. Her breath fogged the glass as tears welled up, not from sadness, but from awe. He had believed in her from the shadows. A man who rarely spoke, yet gave the loudest message of all: "You matter. You're seen." That night, she placed the envelope in a wooden frame and hung it in the schoolhouse. Not as proof of wealth, but as a map of quiet kindness. The ranch slowly became more than land. It became a living chapter in the town's story. Children took turns helping Clara feed the horses. High schoolers painted murals in the barn. Retirees taught folk songs in the old hayloft. And every Sunday, people gathered on the porch for coffee, music, and silence that felt holy. Clara no longer wondered if she was meant to stay. She knew. The mansion, once a stranger's memory, had woven her into its walls. It didn't matter that the floors creaked or the roof needed patching. It was a home held together by love and the fingerprints of everyone who had walked through its doors. Clara sat beneath the willow tree one afternoon as a gentle wind rustled the leaves. In her lap was a book of student essays. On the cover, written in childlike scrawl, "Our favorite teacher who lives in a castle." Spring arrived like a warm breath over the hills. Wildflowers burst along the fences Clara once mended with trembling hands. The children began calling her Miss C, and adults in town started introducing her as the woman who saved the school. But Clara knew the truth. She hadn't saved anything alone. The ranch had done it. The kindness of one silent man. The hands of a community willing to come back to life. Clara used her first teacher's paycheck to build a reading shed on the edge of the property, where any child could borrow a book. She stocked it with fairy tales, adventure stories, and hand-me-down encyclopedias. Even the quietest kids began to visit daily. She saw herself in their eyes, longing to be seen, hoping for a small world of their own. That tiny shed, built from leftover barnwood, became the beating heart of a town once half asleep. Clara's name was whispered in church pews and local markets, not as gossip, but as inspiration. She was invited to speak at town meetings, not for her title, but for her truth. And when she stood before her neighbors, she didn't talk about being poor or abandoned. She talked about resilience, about how even the smallest hand, extended in kindness, could change someone's entire path. She never mentioned JT by name, but everyone knew who she meant when she spoke about the man who gave without asking anything back. His legend grew quietly alongside hers. She didn't want fame. She didn't even want thanks. All Clara wanted was for no other teacher, or child, or drifter to ever feel as invisible as she once did. So she kept teaching, kept tending the ranch, kept opening the door when someone knocked, no matter how late, how lost, or how broken they seemed. One morning, a letter arrived with a golden seal. It was from the State Department of Education. Clara had been nominated for the Heart of the Plains Award, given once a year to an educator who changed lives beyond the classroom. The envelope included an invitation to a formal banquet in the city, an award, and a stipend. She held the letter in her lap, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Not long ago, she had been sleeping on stone behind a hardware store. Now, people called her a hero. But Clara didn't care for awards. That evening, she walked up the path behind the ranch, where JT's old bench still sat facing the valley. She read the letter aloud to the wind. Then she folded it, placed it under a smooth river stone, and whispered, "This is yours, too." The breeze answered back, soft, steady, and full of approval. Years passed, and Clara's hair turned silver, not from sorrow, but from seasons well lived. The school grew, the town flourished, and the ranch never stood empty. Teachers came to learn from her. Children came to feel seen. No one ever left hungry, and no visitor was asked why they had come. The willow tree became a local landmark, the reading shed a symbol of second chances. Clara no longer thought of herself as orphaned. She was rooted now, in land, in people, in purpose. One morning, as she stood by the barn watching the sun rise, she heard the creak of the porch steps behind her. It was a new child, quiet, eyes full of something she recognized, fear laced with hope. Clara knelt, smiled gently, and said nothing. She didn't have to. The ranch would speak for her, like it had always done. This place needed no introductions, only welcome. The state banquet came and went. Clara never attended. She sent a thank you letter and used the stipend to build a shelter on the ranch's far corner. A warm cabin with a sign above the door that read, "Start here." It became a safe haven for young mothers, runaway teens, and anyone the world had overlooked. People whispered that she gave away too much, that she should rest. But Clara believed rest didn't come from silence. It came from knowing you'd poured out everything you had with nothing held back. Every evening, she sat on JT's bench and watched the sky turn gold. Sometimes a hawk circled above, as if guarding the valley. Other times, the wind blew just right, and it felt like JT was sitting beside her. She would nod once, quietly, the way he once did. And in that small movement, she always knew he had chosen right. When Clara passed, it wasn't dramatic. She fell asleep in the old armchair with a book resting on her chest, and the fireplace humming low. The town held a vigil that lasted all night. Children laid flowers on the schoolhouse steps. Parents wept softly under the willow. And when the sun rose, something remarkable happened. People stayed. Not out of duty, but out of love. The mansion didn't close. The school didn't stop. They kept her rhythm alive. Her story became part of local lore. Not the one about the woman who once slept behind a store, but the one about the teacher who turned a stranger's house into everyone's home. On the mantel, above the fire, hung the letter she once found from JT's wife. Beside it, a new frame held a note written in shaky crayon. Miss C. I want to be just like you when I grow up.